Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our subsidized tenants' rights training. I'm Noah Moskowitz, the lead housing organizer for One Northside. For the last 8 years, I've worked across Chicago to bring tenants together to fight and organize to stay in our homes, improve our living conditions, and change the laws to make affordable homes higher in quantity, quality, and to make it easier for all of us to have one. The coronavirus or COVID-19 crisis has caused millions of us to lose jobs or income, putting our homes at risk. However, hundreds of thousands of us live in subsidized housing, where the owner receives money or loans from the government. These include HUD, CHA, Section 8 vouchers, and many other kinds of housing. That's important because most tenants who live in subsidized housing have the right to lower their rent to about 1/3 of their income, whatever that income is. And even if they don't, they usually have stronger protections under the law against eviction or displacement. This is especially true of the new eviction protection laws that have been passed because of coronavirus. This training will explain how to know if you live in common types of subsidized housing, what kind, and what your rights are in each, under normal circumstances and during coronavirus. Crucially, it will also explain how you can enforce these rights if you are being denied them. This training was put together by Legal Aid Chicago, Shriver Center, and Uptown People's Law Center, in partnership with Jane Addams Senior Caucus, One Northside, and Northside Action for Justice. We are community organizations and legal aid agencies that are made up of and work with tenants across Chicago to educate renters about their rights, enforce those rights inside and outside of court through legal representation and organizing, and fight to pass laws that guarantee new rights to tenants on the city, state, and national level. You will hear frequently throughout this presentation that if you have follow-up questions or you're dealing with a specific issue, to reach out to a lawyer or local community organization. The simplest way to do that is to use the contact information on this slide, and we'll help connect you to the person best able to help solve your issue. This contact info will be on the screen throughout the entire presentation as well. I'll read it out in a moment for those joining us by phone. That doesn't mean that you should just reach out to us and skip the training, though. The information here is critical, and it will be much easier for any of us to support you in whatever you're going through if you've exposed yourself to it first. So if you have any follow-up questions from this training, or you need support for an issue you or your neighbors are going through, first try to fill out the bit.ly/HUD-CHA help link. That's bit.ly/HUD-CHA-HELP. If you answer the questions in that link, we can identify your issue and its solution much more quickly. If you can't, or your question doesn't fit that format, that's all right. Call or text me at 312-566-8385. That's 312-566-8385. Be sure to leave a voicemail if you call. Or you can email lily@seniorcaucus.org. That's LILLY at senior, SENIOR, caucus, CAUCUS.org. No matter how you get in touch with us, all of us who organize this training will help answer your question or resolve your issue. If you missed that info, this training is being recorded and will be shared widely. Now, without further ado, let's get on to the training.
Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Gilbert, and I'm a housing attorney with Legal Aid Chicago. I'm going to talk to you today about subsidized housing, different rights in different kinds of subsidized housing, and later I'll talk about how to access legal assistance. A couple of points before I begin. Laws are always changing, so make sure that you get up-to-date information. This presentation is general background. If you have a specific legal problem, you should reach out to an attorney or an organizer who can give you specific advice to your particular problem. And last, the information I have is based on my practice in Chicago, Illinois. You'll want to make sure that you're talking to someone who knows the laws in your area. We're going to talk about different types of subsidized housing and how to tell what type you have. Knowing what type of subsidy you have is important because different programs have different rules and regulations, and we want to make sure that you're applying the rules and regulations that fit with your program. When most people think about subsidized housing, they think about public housing. Now, the way to tell what kind of subsidized housing it is depends on who is paying the subsidy amount and who they're paying it to. So public housing is really just part of the picture. In public housing, HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, pays a subsidy directly to a local public housing authority. You have traditional public housing, senior housing, scattered site, and then newer mixed income communities. Now, if you happen to pay your rent to a private company like Eastlake Management or Holston Management, then you may still have public housing because in Chicago, public housing is often managed by a private company. Public housing tenants have the most legal rights of any kind of subsidized tenants. The rent is tied to the unit, which means that if you lose your right to live in that particular unit, you also lose the rental assistance. But the lease renews automatically every year. Don't worry if your lease is at the end of its term, because it can only be terminated for good cause, which includes not paying rent. It can't be terminated with a 30-day notice like a private landlord. One of the important parts of any kinds of subsidized housing is that the tenant recertifies annually or some other period that their household and their income still qualify for the subsidized housing. And then the landlord or public housing authority bases the rent on about 30% of the tenant's income. A public housing tenant can ask for a recertification on an interim basis if their income goes down. We're going to talk a lot more about interim recertifications later. Now, public housing tenants get a 14-day notice if they're late with their rent. If you've gotten a 14-day notice, then you probably live in public housing because everyone else only has to give a 5-day notice. The 14-day notice is not just about time to pay the rent. It also gives the public housing tenant time to request a grievance. And if you've got a 10-day notice or a 14-day notice in public housing, you should always ask for a grievance. Attorneys represent tenants at grievances. At the housing authority doesn't provide an attorney, but you can bring one with, and it's a good idea to bring one. The other kind of subsidized housing that we talk about when we look at public housing authorities is the Housing Choice Voucher or the Section 8 voucher program. Now, Section 8 involves three parties: the tenant, the housing authority, and a private landlord. And unlike most other subsidies, vouchers can be moved from one apartment to the next. That means that the voucher tenant has to deal with both the public housing authority and the landlord, which can be good or bad sometimes. Like public housing, voucher tenants recertify. In Chicago, you do that at a Chicago Housing Authority office. Again, rent is based on approximately 30% of income, although it can get pretty complicated. But it means that you can ask for an interim recertification. Now, the voucher participation can only be terminated for good cause, for violation of a family obligation, and also you have a right to a hearing. Public housing authorities allow you to bring an attorney to a voucher termination hearing, and it's always a good idea to bring an attorney with you. Now, the lease is with the landlord, a private landlord. The lease can have a term. It doesn't continue on, like I mentioned, for public housing. And the landlord can give a 30-day notice. The landlord can also file an eviction. Filing an eviction in a voucher tenancy doesn't always mean that you're going to lose the subsidy, but it's a really good idea if a voucher tenant has an eviction case to call for advice. Now, the final point that I want to make about vouchers is that in the city of Chicago and suburban Cook County, it's illegal to discriminate against voucher holders. However, I know that happens all the time. You can file a complaint of discrimination with the Chicago or county human rights organizations, and you can get a free attorney or a fair housing organization worker to help you file a charge of discrimination. Now, the next type of subsidized housing we're going to talk about is where the subsidy goes directly from HUD to a private management company. No public housing involvement. Sometimes it's called Section 8 project-based housing. Sometimes it's called multifamily housing. But here we'll just call it HUD housing because I think that's what most people call it anyway. There are some similarities between HUD housing and public housing: interim recertifications, income-based rent, and also you can only have a for-cause eviction. No 30-day notices like a private landlord can give. Again, in HUD housing, the subsidy is tied to the unit, and you generally can't move from one HUD housing unit to another. So an eviction would end both the right to that unit and the right to the subsidy. You really want to try to get an attorney if you have an eviction from HUD housing. There are lots of different kinds of HUD housing, believe it or not, but I think that's probably enough detail for right now. There's something that's called supportive housing. Sometimes it's called shelter plus care. That was an older name for the program. And the money goes to a local not-for-profit. Again, it shares a lot of characteristics with other subsidized housing. Its rent is based on income. Sometimes it's permanent supportive housing. Sometimes it's time limited. You can get your rent reduced if you have a decrease in income. Sometimes you can move in and sometimes not. You'll want to talk to an attorney or organizer if you have questions about supportive housing. So we're going to change gears here. We've been talking about the kind of housing that is been funded by the Federal Housing and Urban Development. The next two kinds of housing that we talk about do not come from HUD, and they're administered in a much different way. There's the low-income housing tax credit. It provides for a below-market rent, so you're paying less than market tenants, but it's not 30% of your income like HUD housing. And you don't get a recertification just because your income goes down. The whole building can have tax credits, or maybe sometimes just some units, and there can be tax credit units and other subsidized housing. I think you're getting the idea why I keep telling you that you're going to want to talk to an attorney or an organizer about subsidized housing. Now, if there's an eviction or if the tenant decides to leave the tax credit unit, usually the tenant loses a subsidy. The final program we're going to talk about is called Illinois Residential Housing Support Program, except no one ever really calls it that. Usually people call it Chicago Low Income Housing Trust Fund or Trust Fund Unit or CEDA, and those two organizations administer the program in Chicago and suburban Cook. Like other subsidies, it's difficult, if not impossible, to move. The subsidy is below market, so the rent is less than market rent, but it's not necessarily 30% of income. And in this kind of subsidy, if the tenant loses their income, the rent doesn't necessarily go down. Now, we've gone into incredible detail about different kinds of housing subsidies. Why do we need to know all the differences between the different subsidies? Right now, during the COVID-19 pandemic, there are 2 eviction moratoriums for you to be thinking about. The governor has entered an executive order that says that no housing provider, no one, private, public, subsidized, can file an eviction case for rent in the state of Illinois until at least May 30th. And then we'll find out at the end of May whether that's continued. In March, Congress passed a federal law called the CARES Act. You may have heard of the CARES Act. It's the same act from which many of us got a $1,200 economic incentive payment. So the CARES Act also provides that no subsidized housing provider can start an eviction case for rent for 120 days from March, so that is until June 25th, and then they must give a 30-day notice. So not the 14-day notice or the 5-day notice we've talked about previously. They have to have a 30-day notice, which essentially means that no subsidized housing landlord is going to be able to file an eviction until the end of July. Now, you'll notice I bolded the words for rent, and that's because both under the governor's moratorium and the CARES Act moratorium, landlords can file evictions for really serious lease violations that aren't related to rent. Now, here's where the different subsidies come into play, because the CARES Act only applies to federal subsidies. So people who have state residential housing support only have the governor's eviction moratorium now. But remember, I said that laws often change, and that might be changing too. There are some other properties that are covered by the CARES Act, but they're not considered subsidized housing, so we're not really going to go into them right now. Hello again. It's Michelle Gilbert from Legal Aid Chicago again. And now I'm going to talk to you about how you can access legal assistance. You've heard all of these details in reference to a lot of different federal laws, regulations, state laws. So you can see that this is a complicated issue. And like any other sort of program with regulations, you really want to talk to someone who specializes in the program. Legal assistance attorneys can help you with grievances, with recertifications, with repayment agreements. Now, I'm saying all of these things because prevention is better than defending an eviction. When I was talking about moratoriums before, those were just limits on the ability of a housing provider to file an eviction case in court. No moratorium prevents a landlord from collecting rent or excuses a tenant from his or her obligation to pay rent. So if you have lost your income, you want to look at recertification, you want to look at repayment agreements, and legal aid programs can help you with all of these. To contact legal aid, you can go to Carpels. There's the phone number and their website. Because there are lots of different legal aid programs, Carpels can help you find the program that best addresses your need. If you'd like to get some more legal information, you can go to Illinois Legal Aid Online. There are lots of short videos. There are lots of forms and other information that you can pull up to read and sometimes print out to help you deal with some things. All legal aid programs that Carpels is going to refer you to are free programs for people who qualify. Most programs have the ability to speak with people in English or Spanish right away, and everyone can get other interpreters for other languages. Now, if it should happen that you get an eviction court case, you may get some fancy mailing from some for-profit attorney. And I'm just suggesting that you don't be too impressed by their materials. Someone with subsidized housing wants an attorney who knows about subsidized housing. You don't want an attorney who's going to make a quick deal for you to move out of the property, which could cause you to lose your housing and cause you to lose your subsidy. And like I said, CARPLs can help you get to the right legal aid program to help you. You can, if you have subsidized housing, you can also call Legal Aid Chicago directly. You can call 312-341-1070. That line's open from 8 to 4 every day, and you want to try to call early if you can. You can also apply to Legal Aid Chicago by going to our website. You can click on the button that says Apply for Services. And the Legal Aid Chicago website also has lots of updates on many areas of law, not just housing, unemployment, family law, and other issues that are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope this information has been helpful, and I sincerely mean it. If you have a legal problem, you should really call Legal Aid. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Charlie Isaacs. I work at the Uptown People's Law Center, UPLC. My job is to learn from tenants about their experiences and train them on their rights. Today, I'm going to talk about reducing your rent in subsidized housing. Make no mistake, the rent reduction process we're about to talk about, it's all about fighting for your homes, for your families, for your futures. I tell this to people in all my presentations. By taking part in this discussion, you are fighting to protect your community. Your ability to keep your home will make it easier for others to keep their homes as well. So thank you for taking part in this training during this critical time of the coronavirus pandemic. UPLC is all about community. That's where I work. We were established by community residents 40 years ago, and we serve the community where we're located. We focus on 3 issue areas specifically: housing rights, including disputes with landlords, the civil rights of people in prison, and Social Security disability benefit denials. And before we go on, I must say that this presentation doesn't count as formal advice between a lawyer and a client. But if you think you need a lawyer, you can contact us using the info at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to jot down questions as we go, and you can send them to me via email, charlie@uplcchicago.org. So let's talk about rent reductions. The fancy term for this is interim recertification. This applies to several different types of housing programs, but it doesn't apply to the low-income housing tax credit program, nor does it apply to the home program. Interim recertification is a process set up by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, to make it possible during the year for people in public housing and project-based housing and people with housing choice vouchers to get their rent changed. You see, once a year you have a chance to have your rent level recalculated, but if you lose a job or you lose one of the breadwinners in your household midway through the year, interim certification allows you to report the change and ask for more assistance with rent. In other words, a rent reduction. I'm going to get a little technical for just a second in case you want to know the mechanics of how this whole thing works. If you live in subsidized housing, you still pay for part of the cost of your home. That amount that you pay each month is called the total tenant payment, the TTP. The rest of the cost for your home is covered by the government. That's called the housing assistance payment, the HAP or the HAP. So every month the landlord gets a payment from you and a payment from the government. Together they equal the cost of your housing. But what if you lose income? Maybe you get laid off, or you get a pay decrease, or you lose some of your hours. In that case, you'll need to reduce the amount of rent you pay. You'll need a reduction to the required total tenant payment. Interim recertification provides a way for you to report your income change to get the TTP lowered and a rent reduction and an increase in your housing assistance. A lot of this is happening right now due to COVID-19. Because of the shelter-in-place order, a tremendous number of people have lost their jobs or lost their hours because they got to stay safe and stay at home, and businesses can't stay open. No matter how isolating it can feel while sheltering in place after losing a job, know this: you are not alone. It's not your fault for sure, and you still have options. If you've lost a job or some of your pay, you can get on the phone immediately and ask for a rent reduction. Do it right away. If you decide to listen to the rest of this training, fine, but do it right after. The faster you act, the more you'll be able to reduce what you owe each month for your rent, and the sooner you'll be able to reduce it. If you delay asking for your rent to be reduced, you might actually have to explain why you didn't report your change sooner. So do it as quickly as possible. Now, if you live in public housing, you're going to report your change of income to your building property manager. And if you live in project-based Section 8 housing or HUD housing, same thing, you report to the building property manager. The big difference is with vouchers. If you have a Section 8 housing choice voucher, remember, this means you have a voucher, the subsidy that you can take with you, even if you move to a new place. Then you report your change in income to the local public housing authority for your voucher. Your property manager isn't really involved. By public housing authority, I mean either the Chicago Housing Authority, CHA, or the Cook County Housing Authority, CCHA. Here's the contact information for each. Because of the coronavirus outbreak, HUD has made the interim recertification process easier and less cumbersome. You can report your loss of income by phone or email. And you don't need to have supporting documents. You simply call them up or send an email and explain your situation and ask for a rent reduction. Just keep in mind that if you get a rent reduction, they will check later to make sure the information you reported was true. Now, I know I just said you don't necessarily need supporting documents, but if you have supporting documents, you should definitely use them to make your case. Don't worry about it if it's impossible, but if you can show documents, it will make the whole process easier. Supporting documents include pay stubs, payroll support summary reports, letters of termination from a former boss, unemployment benefit notices, and more. If you have pay stubs, try to find the last 4 to 6 pay stubs if you can, so you can show how your income went down. Now, I'm telling you this just in case you have supporting documents so you understand how they work and how to use them. But again, if you're watching and listening and thinking, yikes, I don't have any documents like these, don't worry about it. They aren't necessary. I'd rather you report a job or pay loss now than search your apartment inside out looking for documents you don't know you have. Because once you get on the phone and you say that you need a rent reduction, then you should be able to get your rent recalculated to be 1/3 of whatever your income is. So this is a run-of-the-mill pay stub. It's not real, but it's a template of what it looks like. It shows the number of hours you work, how much you're paid for each hour, the time period covered by the paycheck, and the money taken out of your paycheck for deductions. Now, if you have the last 4 back-to-back pay stubs, you can show, for example, that your income suddenly dropped off in mid-April because your hours got scaled back. This is also why a payroll summary is a good supporting document, because it shows how your level of pay over time changed and how. So if you have anything like this with you, ask the person you report to, the housing manager or the housing authority. Ask them if you can text or email a picture of each supporting document. But again, just so we are absolutely clear, If you can't get supporting documents together, don't delay calling or emailing to get a rent reduction. This is survival mode right now. If the person at the other end of the phone or email says you have to show them supporting documents, you can call for legal assistance. Figure that out. Okay, enough about supporting docs. Let's say you report your income change, and if you have any supporting documents, you send pictures of them over as well. What happens next? In regular non-COVID times, when there's not a pandemic going on, the property manager or housing authority, whoever you report to, would call you in for an in-person interview to go over things. You and every adult in your household, in your apartment, would sign forms giving them permission for the housing person to look at your financials and employment info like tax returns and unemployment claims just to see exactly what happened with your income. Then the landlord would check with those outside parties to see if the information you reported was accurate. And then after doing that, then you would be able to get a rent reduced. Due to COVID-19, because COVID-19 has caused so many people to lose income, and it's an emergency, HUD is loosening things up. First, HUD is not requiring in-person interviews. The landlord calls you in for one. You can say you cannot come in for health reasons. Second, those forms I just mentioned that the adult household members have to sign, it doesn't have to be an in-person, quote unquote, wet signature. It doesn't have to be an actual signature on the form. It can be a photo of the signature, and if that's not feasible, if you can't do that, then they can just get the signature later. They can't hold things up for it. Third, pre-verification is no longer required. You call or email saying you need a rent reduction, and you can immediately get your rent recalculated to be 1/3 of whatever your income is. The manager or housing authority will confer with outside groups later on to make sure you're telling the truth, but they can't hold up your rent reduction until they do all of that outside verification. This leads us to the big question. When will the increased rental assistance, your rent reduction, take effect? If you live in public or project-based HUD housing, either of those, the reduced rent will apply on the first of the month after your loss of income. To understand this better, let's look at the calendar. These are the months of April and May. If you lose your job on, say, April 22nd and immediately reported the change 2 days later, you can get your rent reduced effective May 1st, the first month after the event itself, the loss of the job. Now, let's say you lose your job, just like before, you lose it on April 22nd, but you don't report until the next month, say May 12th. In that case, the rent reduction would still apply retroactively back to May 1st. Basically, you would get a credit on your account to make up for the amount you paid towards rent at the beginning that you didn't have to because of your income change. The big difference is with Housing Choice Voucher Program. Here, the housing authority has much more discretion to decide when the rent reduction applies. So back to our calendar. For vouchers, if you lose your job April 22nd and immediately report it, your rent reduction should apply the next month, just like before. But if you report in May, then CHA will have the ability to determine if the rent reduction applies to the first of the month after the loss of income, in this case, May 1st, or the first of the month after you've reported the income change, in this case, June 1st. If this is your situation, where you are a voucher holder and you lost income, a job, hours, a pay cut in 1 month, but didn't report until the next month, explain to the housing authority why you face special hardship and why you need the rent reduction to apply based on the date of the loss of income, the earlier date. If you make a case for yourself, CHA might be able to apply the lower tenant payment requirement to the earlier date. Okay, that basically covers the basics of how interim recertification works and how to get a rent reduction. Now, there's some more complexities to it. Sometimes a landlord can deny you a rent reduction or delay processing under certain circumstances. If you run into any problems like these, or more generally, if you have any other specific questions about how this process works, you should contact legal aid. To talk with UPLC, you can email us at uplc@uplcchicago.org. And you can call us at 773-769-1411. We are still taking clients now. We provide free legal aid to tenants living in the following zip codes: 60613, 60625, 60626, 60640, and 60660. But even if you don't live in these zip codes, you can contact us with questions and we'll be happy to help. Please feel free to email me at charlie@uplcchicago.org to ask questions pertaining to your specific situation, to clarify things from this presentation, to ask for resources, or even to arrange a separate tenant rights training. I'm also happy to look over letters that tenants or tenant unions draft to landlords. Finally, for more housing rights information, please go to our website, uplcchicago.org/resources/housing-resources.html. We are posting quick 1 to 2 page guides on tenant rights topics in English, Spanish, Arabic, Korean, Mandarin, Russian, Tagalog, and Vietnamese. Okay, that's all I have for now. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Take care.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Coffey, and I am a housing justice staff attorney at the Schreiber Center on Poverty Law. I am here to talk with you today about how to elevate your complaints if management is not responsive and your right to organize. Just real quick, the Schreiber Center is an organization that fights for economic and racial justice. We've been around for more than 50 years and are fighting with and for people experiencing poverty in Illinois and across the country through litigation and policy advocacy. We do a lot of work on our housing team with tenant associations and community-based organizations. So you just heard from Charlie about what to do, how to make sure that you are getting a recertification in certain housing programs. So just to recap real quick, recertifications are required for certain types of housing programs where the tenants pay an income-based rent. They're not available, for example, in the low-income housing tax credit program. It is incredibly important to make sure that you follow up any request for a recertification in writing, preferably through email with supporting documentation as Charlie described, and that you should keep a copy of that request. But what do you do if management still doesn't recertify you and or address other types of complaints that you might have? The answer to that really depends on the type of housing program that you're in. So I'm just going to go through program by program so that you know who to address and elevate your concerns to. So first is in the Housing Choice Voucher Program, also known as Section 8 vouchers. If you are having an issue with your apartment or something that is within your landlord's control, of course you should always go to the property manager first, but if they aren't responsive, you should contact the Chicago Housing Authority to report your landlord for not complying with your request. If it's an issue that is related to the housing conditions or other types of safety concerns related to COVID-19, not keeping the building safe, you should contact 311, which is the city's non-emergency line. Or you can do this through, there's now a 311 app where you can submit a written request for assistance. Then you should follow up with your alderperson to make sure that the city is processing your request. If that doesn't work, you should contact a community-based organization or a legal services organization. And I will share all of that contact information in one place at the end of this presentation. Now, if you have problems with your voucher, for example, you need to recertify, you should contact the CHA directly to make sure that the recertification is processed and you're providing them with any documentation that they're requesting. First, you should try the HCV, Housing Choice Voucher portal. If that doesn't work, here's an email address for contacting the voucher program or a phone number to call. Again, if that doesn't work, you should contact legal services or a community organization for assistance. Now, if you're in the public housing program, it is important, once again, to emphasize that any type of issue needs to go straight to management first. You only elevate once you've attempted to work things out with your property manager. But after you speak with management and if something's not getting resolved, you should contact the Chicago Housing Authority directly. You can also contact the local advisory council, which is the resident council for your building, and this central advisory council is the resident council for the CHA residents as a whole. If you live in traditional public housing, the contact information for your LAC rep is available at this link. If you're in mixed income housing and a public housing resident, there's a separate process set up. So you should contact the Office of the Ombudsman for assistance in trying to deal with your concern. Now, if it is conditions or safety related, so not related to recertifying your rent, you should contact, again, the City of Chicago through 311, the 311 app, or follow up with your alderperson for assistance. For all of these issues, if you're unable to come to a resolution that you need, contact a community-based organization or legal aid for assistance. If you are in the project-based Section 8 program, which is also often called HUD housing, you should always, again, contact property management first, but if that doesn't work, there is a contract administrator known as National Housing Compliance that is responsible for overseeing managers and owners in the project-based Section 8 program. Here's their phone number. Or you can submit a complaint through their website directly and include your contact information so they can follow up with you. It's really important that you go to National Housing Compliance first, but if National Housing Compliance doesn't resolve your issue, you should contact HUD's Office of Multifamily directly for assistance in talking with what's known as an account executive, who is a HUD employee who is responsible for overseeing the on-site property management company and the owner of your building. And that email address is available here. So you should contact HUD and National Housing Compliance about all types of issues that you're having with your landlord. But if it is specifically conditions or safety related to COVID-19 or something similar, you should contact the City of Chicago through 311, once again, available through the app, and follow up with your alderperson to make sure that it's getting resolved. Again, if at any point during this process you're not getting the resolution that you need, you should contact a community-based organization or legal aid for help. Now, in the low-income housing tax credit program, it is really important to remember that these rents do not decrease if somebody's is unable to pay their rent, because these rents are flat rents, so they're not based on the tenant's income. So you cannot request a recertification in the low-income housing tax credit program. But if you have other types of issues at the building, for example, unsafe housing conditions, you should always contact your landlord or property management company for assistance with that first. And if you're having problems paying the rent in the low-income housing tax credit program, you should also talk with your landlord to attempt to figure out some kind of payment arrangement to make sure that you can stay in your housing, and to contact legal aid for assistance in doing that. But if conditions issues are not being addressed in the LIHTC program, you should contact the government agency that is tasked with overseeing your building. Now, it can be difficult to know whether or not that is the Illinois Housing Development Authority or the City of Chicago's Department of Housing. So if you have questions about that, again, contact a community organization or legal aid for assistance in figuring that out. And again, that contact information will be at the end of this presentation. And then also, if you're going to contact the City of Chicago for help with a building code violation or public health issue, again, call 311, the city's 311 app, and then follow up with your alderperson. Now, in the Rental Housing Support and Chicago Low-Income Housing Trust Fund program, again, it's important that if you're having issues to speak with your landlord about it first. But if you're having issues that you need to raise higher than that, you can contact the Chicago Low-Income Housing Trust Fund at this email address and phone number. You can contact the City of Chicago at 311 and your alderperson for assistance with safety and conditions issues. Now, I want to talk real quick about generally your rights to organize, which is such a critical way to make sure that that everybody in your building is protected, and that you are working together to ensure that issues that are common for you and all of your neighbors are being addressed. Now, the what your rights look like varies based on the type of housing that you are in. But for the vast majority of subsidized housing residents, here's kind of the overview of the types of rights that you have to organize. And the only, so this is for all housing that is covered by the Chicago Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance, which is generally all subsidized buildings. I'd say the most likely exception is if you are a voucher holder and your landlord also lives in the building with you, then you may not be covered by the RLTO. And so, I would say if you think that there's been a violation of your right to organize, you should contact a lawyer for an assessment of your case to see if there's anything that can be done. But what the right to organize looks like in general in Chicago is that, you can't be retaliated against. If you request repairs, complain about code violations, work with a community-based organization, complain to the media, if you testify in court, if you work to form a tenant association, or, generally speaking, if you're looking to exercise any of your rights under the law, and you're doing so in a reasonable way, you cannot have the kind of terms and conditions of your tenancy changed. And so what that means is that, it can't take away, the types of access that you've always enjoyed to your unit. They can't file an eviction case against you for doing any of these things. Now, there's two housing programs where there are more prescribed significant protections, where the federal regulations really outline additional organizing rights. And so I'm going to go into those very briefly. In the project-based Section 8 program, again, this is the kind of HUD housing program. Tenants have really expansive organizing rights that allow them to form and operate a tenant association that is democratically operating and that is fully independent of management. That means the tenant association gets to decide how it's gonna work. As long as it's democratic, as long as the association holds meetings that are open to all residents, the tenant association is allowed to do essentially any reasonable activity to run itself as an organization. So usually that means working with community-based organizations, having a community organizer that helps you run your tenant organization. It means distributing flyers, going door to door throughout the building as a tenant. Generally speaking, it also means holding tenant meetings on site. I would caution during this time that it's not a good time to be holding meetings in person, generally speaking. And so I would urge you to work with an organizer to figure out how to hold a meeting at this time that is safe. But management, cannot be telling you that you can't generally hold meetings, but we need to, be conscious of the public health emergency that we're in right now. And also in the public housing program, there are pretty strict regulations that govern how a resident council can operate. There are, it's pretty regimented in terms of, how elections take place, how many residents are part of the organization, but, this is all written into to bylaws that the tenant or that the resident council, follows in terms of how they operate. So generally speaking, in Chicago, a resident council is known as a local advisory council. Again, if you don't know who your LAC representative is, here's a link to their contact information. Each building should, have a representative that can help them. They can help you address any kind of issue you're having in the building. And then the Central Advisory Council, or the CAC, brings together the LACs to negotiate with CHA on jurisdiction-wide issues and policies. So contact your LAC representative to learn more about this, about the LAC, and to see how you can raise any kind of issues that you're having in your building. So if you have any questions or need any follow-up help, here is a link, bit.ly/HUD-CHA help. If you fill that out with the text just like it is right here on my screen, it will take you to a form where you can fill out any kind of issue that you're having, and we'll make sure that somebody follows up with you to get an answer to your question. If you need to get in contact with a community organizer, you can text Noah from One Northside. Here's his phone number. Remember to leave a voicemail if you do call. Or you can contact Lily from Jane Addams Senior Caucus at her email address listed right here. Thank you again for joining today's webinar. Here are all of the organizations that helped put this together today, and we look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.